So Errol Spence did not lose to Crawford that night by accident. He walked in already beaten. No sparring, no sleep, no real southpaw prep, no emergency break. Just a fighter ignoring every warning because the payout meant more than the pain. So Spence has now admitted what the fight already showed. The camp was broken. His body was weak. His mind knew it could get ugly. But the money, the family pressure, and the moment were too big to walk away from. So he stepped in anyway. And Crawford exposed everything. So we're going to explore some of Errol Spence's statements. And I guess the premise here to understand is, are these rational reasons for the performance, or are these excuses? And this is the performance against Terrance Crawford. And I guess only you can decide with regards to that. So let's go through some of these statements. So Spence went into the biggest fight of his career, having not sparred for 6 weeks. So when I say statements, he's paraphrasing his statements. And his corner never arranged proper preparation. So to me, the question is why? Why did he not spar for 6 weeks? Was that due to some physical issues? Because clearly there needs to be some accountability, not only from the boxer, but also from the training camp. Why did he not spar? And also the proper preparation. That is a training responsibility. And considering that his trainer is well respected in boxing circles, I'm curious as to why. Why was there not proper preparation, and why was there not sparring for 6 weeks? My assumption would be that there was some type of injury, or that he was not feeling well. And then the next statement is that, and again this is paraphrasing, his trainer Derek did not create the tactical environment to stimulate or to simulate Crawford's southpaw jab, which is one of the weapons that dismantled him. You would assume that when you fight Terrance Crawford, there's a lot you've got to prepare for. One of the things you need to prepare for is that he switch hits. So not only can he fight from the orthodox position where the jab comes from the left hand with the left foot forward, but he can also fight from the southpaw position where the right leg is forward and then you're throwing the jab with the right hand. It would be bizarre not to prepare for this. And then the next question would be, how do you prepare for this? Well, ideally, when you are using the pads, the pad man should be in the southpaw position. I think that would be ideal. But even more important than that, you need to have sparring partners that are not only southpaws, they need to be good counter-punching southpaws. So they need to be a southpaw, but they need to replicate part of the identity of Crawford. So to not even have the basics of dealing with a southpaw jab is wild. And I would like to know why. Why was that overlooked? At the elite level, and this is championship level, that should never happen. Also, Spence said he felt physically weak and depleted the entire camp. And he's stating it's not just ring rust, but something deeper he describes as not translating. So this maybe explains the 6 weeks without sparring. If a trainer can see that you're physically exhausted, or you're going through something and you're having some problems, maybe there was a tactical decision to delay the sparring. To me, it would seem like if you cannot spar, you probably can't fight. But obviously there's, it's a huge financial fight. There's massive pressure, so I can understand that it would be hard to pull out. But if he was having physical issues, then that would give some rational reasons as to why you would delay sparring. But to not spar at all, that seems... I'm curious as to what the reasons would be. Now remember, different boxing trainers have different philosophies when it comes to sparring. Some trainers will have the philosophy of sparring many rounds. Some trainers will have the philosophy of sparring fewer rounds, and then the intensity of those rounds certain trainers will have different types of information with regards to, for example, some trainers will advocate for really hard rounds, while others will see sparring as more of like perfecting your skills and maybe doing light sparring or body sparring. So there's different philosophies with regards to sparring. I'm not sure what Derek James's philosophy is regards to sparring. Is he into high intense sparring or is he into more light sparring? If we get the answer to that question, then that can determine the rationale behind taking out the 6 weeks. Now, the next part is really important, and that's the financial motivation. Because let's be honest, people box, professional boxing, part of professional boxing is about earning money and earning a lot of money because you have a small window of opportunity to make a lot of money if you're an elite fighter. And there was a financial element to this fight. Apparently, according to Spence, the maximum payout, the taking care of the family, that overrode the clear red flags that the body was sending him, because there was physical issues, there was preparation issues, there were clear red flags, but the financial motivation overlooked that. And you can kind of understand that, because it's hard to walk away from millions of dollars, if we're honest. Put yourself in Spence's shoes. It's hard to walk away from that. And then the next part is that Spence walked into the locker room before the fight tired because he hadn't slept and had privately felt for over a month that it could be bad. So there's a few things here. He walked into the locker room tired, he hadn't slept, and he had this feeling, this negative feeling. My first question here would be, have you felt that before? And if so, what happened? So for example, have you walked into the locker room tired, not slept, but had a great performance? Have you ever walked into a fight and had a bad feeling before? In other words, is this unique? Is it unique for you to experience those things? And then the next question would be why? Why did he feel tired walking into that locker room? And of course, you have professionals in your corner to, in the team, when you're warming up in the dressing room, it's about, getting your adrenaline up and, getting you in the zone. I think, what's the term? I think it's called, creating a sweat. I can't remember the term. But there's a few issues here. Number one, you walked into the locker room tired, but that issue wasn't resolved. You hadn't slept. Why hadn't you slept? What was the reasons behind that? Again, the context behind not sleeping is important. For example, if you hadn't slept because you'd been out the night before, then, that's self-harm. But if you hadn't slept, you'd gone to bed, but you just couldn't sleep, well, that's a different context. And maybe there might be some rational reasons. Did you take too much caffeine? Did you, there's a lot in these statements, but there isn't the appropriate context to understand if this is unusual. And I think that's the important bit here. And I'm assuming when a fighter goes into a fight, they might have bad feelings, they might have good feelings, and these feelings might change. On Monday, you're feeling confident. On Tuesday, you're not feeling confident. You might have a great sparring session and feel really confident, and then you have a bad sparring day, and then you start to doubt yourself. So that narrative bias, it might be real to Spence, but is it objectively real? And then the next statement is that despite all these red flags, Spence fought anyway. Now, let's be honest. If you walk into a locker room tired, it's the day of the fight, you can't really pull out. I guess you could argue that you can, but that would have such ramifications because it's the day of the fight. You've passed all the medicals. That would be a colossal problem. So once you've walked in, once it's the day of the fight, it's kind of like there is no going back. And Spencer used a term that he put himself on the altar for his family's future. So it appears to me that he's had poor preparation. He's physically not feeling good. Psychologically, he's not feeling good. He's had a bad sleep. Then he's gone into the dressing room feeling tired. And all these negative things are happening. And he's just focusing on, okay, this is for his family's future. I can understand that. And then the post-stoppage, so once Crawford has beaten Spence, Spence stated that he walked into the locker room and told his corner to, quote, stop looking sad. So, in a sense, he was emotionally composed. So he was emotionally composed while physically devastated. And physically devastated in preparation, physically devastated before the fight, and obviously physically devastated in the fight. But there's a key thing here. The fact that he had to tell his corner to stop looking sad indicates that, his team wanted him to win. It's not as if, if there was problems in the camp and there was genuine tension and anger, you would think, well, maybe they wouldn't care, or maybe they would have a feeling of indifferent. But if people are expressing sadness, then that shows that they did care. They wanted him to win. And that was reflecting in their gestures. And Errol Spence, he took the position, to say, okay, guys, we need to, it's okay, stop looking sad. And that's a hard position to take when ultimately a loss, yes, it affects your team, but you can make a credible argument that it affects the fighter the most, because it affects his money the most, and physically and psychologically he gets affected the most. And then the next part is that the rematch, as we know, it never materialized. And according to Spence, this is not because he refused, but because he privately admitted that he needed to take time off. And I guess by that time, knowing that he needed to take time off, the window of opportunity for the rematch, the window had closed. I'm actually not sure what to make of this. For example, not preparing for the southpaw jab, that just sounds criminal. And isn't this a trainer responsibility? And what's the trainer's perspective with regards to that? Maybe the preparation was so bad that this obvious detail got missed. I just don't understand it. And the poor preparation, again, there's the responsibility of the team. That includes the trainer, but also includes the fighter. But I feel like a big part of preparation is creating an optimal boxing background, an optimal boxing environment. Why was that optimal boxing environment not created, and why was the preparation so poor? What solutions did they try? Surely you would think if preparation is bad, you identify the problem and then try and identify the solutions. So was the problem identified at the time, and what were the solutions? And why was there no 6 weeks of sparring? And more importantly, if this was due to health issues, what was the contingency plan? Was there increased pad work, increased strength work? Like, what was put in place to compensate for the lack of sparring? And again, did his team try to understand the physical issues? I'm assuming he would have some form of medical professionals on board. And what did they do? Was anyone trying to understand what these physical issues were? Or is Errol Spence just a private person, and it was just this ambiguity in the camp, and it wasn't understood, and it was unspoken? And what I got from this was a deep sadness from Errol Spence, a deep, deep sadness. And that is a shame. So here is my final statement. Think of this. These are not excuses if they're used to understand what happened. They only become excuses if they are used to take something away from Crawford. And we shouldn't do that. Remember, Crawford may have had injuries, pressure, or bad circumstances too. This is not about diminishing Crawford's win. It is about explaining why Spence looked nothing like himself that night. So that's the end of the video. Now I'm trying to build a digital boxing community. That means I'm interested in your comments, I'm interested in your questions, and I'm interested in your observations. Now, if you want to support the channel, simply like and subscribe and click the hype button. And if you want to watch more content like this, then simply click here or click here. As always, thanks for your time. It is much appreciated.